Yo, what's up, you guys? This is Dart81 here for ZHM Entertainment, and I'm having a look today at the Kotobukiya AfrFX Plus Spider-Man line. Now, this is a seven-figure line, and the most recent one, the final piece, that is the Venom, was released recently, so the line is now complete at last. As you can see, this is what the line looked like in real life. So when you compare it to the actual concept artwork, you'll see that it looks very, very similar. In fact, as a general rule, these figures look great. Now, to date, we've had a look at a couple of them. We've seen the Spider-Man, the Spider-Gwen, Ultimate Spider-Man, and the Venom figures, and you can check those reviews on my channel. But today, we're going to look at the Spider-Man 2099, Agent Venom, and of course, Carnage figure. So yeah, very, very excited about them. These are the last three figures in the line for me to look at. As is always the case with figures of this nature, we will be looking at both the aesthetics and the age factor right after this. So, aesthetics. Now, aesthetics refers to the overall visual appeal of a figure. So, we'll start our discussion with the Spider-Man 2099 figure. Now, first and foremost, we'll look at the base. So the base is a metallic disc which is embossed with the character's logo. Very, very nice. On the underside, we see the now standard piece of felt which prevents scuffing and all of there on your display stand. Now, the figure itself has magnets under the feet, as you would have expected by now, and it's very, very easy to use. Now, what you should do is don't drag it across just for safety's sake. Rather, place it on top like that. The magnet is very, very strong. I didn't notice the actual challenge we saw with the first Spider-Man, that is where there were some scuff marks over there, but I mean, why risk it? It's really not necessary at all. So yeah, what we'll do now is we will look at firstly the paintwork, the overall paintwork, and then we will turn our attention to the sculpting. So in terms of paintwork, what we see over here is a very, very nicely done figure. You'll see there's a fair amount of shading across the figure. There's a fair amount of highlighting as well. Now, the character itself typically is depicted with a metallic luster, and I noticed that they haven't done that with the figure. I would imagine to make it look similar to other figures in the line. But what they did do was actually apply a fair amount of dry brush shading and highlights as well. So it does look pretty kick-ass. The colors are somewhat muted. It has sort of like a darker theme to it. It's a bluish purple kind of paint for the bulk of the figure, with a reddish maroon sort of paint on the highlighted parts. All in all, I'm very happy with it. The paintwork itself is quite decent, as is expected with Kotobukiya. You'll see over here from the back all those shaded areas with some highlights as well, all of which accentuate the musculature on the figure. But I'll come back to the musculature in just a moment. Now, I do want to take a moment just to highlight for you this one piece that, of course, is the web foil. I think that's what it was called in the comic, but yeah, the web foil. It's a translucent plastic that sort of plugs into the back of the figure. So yeah. So at this point, I'd like to turn our attention to the sculpt work. As you can see, and as we've come to expect from Kotobukiya figures as a whole, the sculpt work is very, very nicely done. Now, this is a snap fit figure, and if you look very, very carefully, you may see the joints over there where the figure was actually, assembled. But those are well blended in. The foot itself has one of the foot pegs that we've seen with some of the other figures in the line. That's just to add a bit of balance, but this one here is one of the better balanced one. It doesn't seem to fall over as long as you put it on the actual magnetic display. Now, that web foil, once again, as you can see, it's a translucent piece of plastic that plugs into peg holes on the figure's back, and it has a sort of web design embossed on it, so it looks very, very nice. Now, to just look from the bottom up over here, as you can see, Spider-Man is posed in a sort of crouching, battle-ready pose. It's almost as though he's, poising for a jump or something like that, or a leap. It looks really, really good. It is a lithe pose, very powerful pose. I'm quite happy with it. So overall, visually at the very least, this figure is on point. With that being said, let's turn our attention now to the Agent Venom figure. So to kickstart our discussion about the HM Venom figure, let's look at the base. The base is a metallic plate again with the felt on the underside, which prevents scuffing of your display case. Very, very nice. Once you place the figure on the base, it does seem to hold its pose quite nicely, though I must be frank over here. The choice of pose, at first it didn't really grab me. I mean, he looked like he was doing some sort of ballet or something like that. But the more I look at it, the better it looks. But as you can see, it's not the most well balanced figure. I do wish that they had done something slightly different to counterbalance the weight is distributed, because as you'll see in this video, as you sort of move the base around a bit, the figure does wobble. There you go. See, it tips over, and that's with the magnetic base, mind you. But that's a small niggling detail. Let's just look at the actual paintwork. Well, okay, again, you can't not much to say about paintwork, seeing as it's a primarily black on black figure. But what they were able to do was use a series of different shades or different hues of black. I mean, you can see over there, there's some glossy black paint, some matte black paint, and yeah, so what that does is it adds, like, once again, that sort of liquidy or fluid look for the symbiote. Yeah, see, it's just this balance issue, so irritating, but nonetheless, yeah. So paint wise, I mean, what they've managed to do over here is suggest like different textures and hues, and that's actually accentuated by the actual sculpt choices itself. Like the shoulder pads and the breastplate, for example, now have like a slight texturing to it, which adds some detail to the figure. I mean, I do like the fine sculpted detail. You see, there's the little spikes on the shoulder pads. There's, the pouches, the guns, all of which have done very, very nicely. The white areas where those are painted, those are also painted very, very nicely. It's very clean. There's no mess, no slop, no bleeding. As you would expect from Kotobukiya. Kotobukiya actually does excel in terms of that. So visually, I'm quite happy with it. In terms of pose, like I said, something to be desired over there, but it does have a nice look to it. So, last but certainly not least, the Carnage figure. Now, the Carnage figure is one of the most anticipated in the line, but first, the base. So, once again, we have the metal plate. It has the character's actual face, drawn on it or embossed on it. It looks very nice. I'm quite happy with that. It's very, very detailed, really. On the flip side, of course, the felt over there, and that, of course, prevents scuffing and damage of your display piece. Now, just a concern of you. You see, this one has white eyes, so I think that once you place the figure on, you want to avoid pulling it across like that, because, like we saw with Spider-Man, you might get some damage there. Just place it on. The magnets are fairly solid. I'm going to talk about the foot itself just now, but basically, you see, this one here has very big, sort of like foot peg there just to rest the figure and help with its balancing, because the one foot doesn't have a magnet under it. It's because they're posed. Now the result of that, there we go. You see, if you don't use it with the magnetic base, the figure is bound to fall over. It's not a well balanced figure at all. It's quite top heavy because of that arm. So the best thing to do is, there you go, just place it on the base of there, use the foot peg as well, and those two together now help it actually achieve this look. Because honestly speaking, I don't think the figure would look as good as it does if it wasn't for those really horrid monsterish looking chicken feet. God, that's a terrible way to describe it, but nonetheless, those really monstrous feet. And of course, just looking at the figure overall, you have this giant mid-transform side of a hand. That's what we saw from the character in the comic book. And now that I think about it, it does look very reminiscent of the Ultimate Spider-Man version of Carnage. I mean, it's got those pearlescent-looking eyes, those off-white eyes, and overall, visually, it just looks so nice. I mean, balance issue aside, just the paintwork, the overall execution, it looks marvelous. How can I put it to you? If you look over here, right, you'll see that the actual reds and blacks, as they all blend together, and there's a little bit of like slightly lighter highlighting over there with some deeper shading. You can't really make out the shading too much, but it is there, and what that does is, once again, it creates like sort of that like moist, liquidy look to the symbiote. So I'm very, very happy with how that came out. Still talking about issues of the sculpt, we've got, his mouth open really wide. We've got the pseudopodia all over the show, just like sort of like flaring up and flaring out, just as you would expect from this crazed character, this really insane and out of control character. It looks really, really nice, I have to say. So, yeah, no, overall, like the Carnage is on point. Would I have liked to have seen a slightly different pose? Perhaps maybe one of the more crouching poses would have been much better, but overall speaking, I guess like just like with the artwork itself, you sort of they sort of wanted the villains to be like sort of like hovering over the heroes as it were. But yeah, I'm very happy with how this came out, and it's a very monstrous looking Carnage. So with that, let's talk about the H factor. The H factor is a generic standard that we've coined where we assess the degree to which a figure makes one go ish with excitement or in contrast ish, yeah, with disappointment. So let's talk about each figure in turn. Now, firstly, with the Spider-Man 2099 figure, let's see. So this one here is probably one of my preferred figures in the line. It's I have to say it's kind of underappreciated because this character over here is one of the most compelling Spider-Man characters ever. Now, what I like about it is that it does have this dynamic pose. It has him sort of like, ready to leap into action, but at the same time, almost like as though he's stalking his prey or something like that. All the fine details on the statue itself are present and they're very well done, such as the spikes on his forearms together with the talons on his fingers. I mean, very, very nicely done. While the character itself doesn't have a whole lot of sculpted detail in terms of little nitty-gritties on the statue as you see with some of the other ones, it does have sufficient detail to render the character properly. In addition, what I really like is the way they did the foil and all of that. Now, moving on to the Agent Venom. Well, the Agent Venom, I have to say, is one of the more masterfully sculpted characters. And I say this simply because the way the color scheme works, this primarily black on black look, it's very, very difficult to communicate any sort of detail. Now, what Kotobukiya was able to do over here, and they really excel at this, is that they were able to use a fair amount of highlights to actually accentuate the detail that's there, and they also were able to draw some contrast across the figure by having different sculpted textures as well, as you see with perhaps the shoulder pads, the chest guards, the chest plates rather, and the guns as well. So very, very nicely done, and I do like the way the white painted areas are very neatly done. There's no slop, there's no bleeding or anything of the sort. The pose itself, like I said, it does disappoint me a little bit. It does look as though he's kind of like a ballerina in the middle of a twirl or something like that. But at the same time, I guess it lends a sort of dynamic flair to the figure itself. In execution, it does have a slight problem with balance, but it's nothing too hectic. The figure itself is a very well made one, so even if it did tip over, it's not likely to damage it, to be damaged or damage any other figures in the line itself. But yeah, so the other fine sculpted details, including the pouches along his waist, his knee guards, his boots, the shoulder pads in particular. I mean, all very, very, very nicely done. And I have to say, this figure itself, given the fact that there's not a whole lot of painted detail that they can actually communicate over here with the character, I have to say that they really went all out with the sculpt. There's so many fine subtle details, so the more I look at it, the more I like it. So I have to say that my initial reservations might have been unfounded. And last but certainly not least, the Carnage figure. Now, like I said, I did complain a little bit about the balance over here. Just to achieve that look with his hand, that really large transforming side hand, we did have to sacrifice some of the balance and stability. What they've done is they've added a really large, like sort of like foot peg slash balance thingamabob over there at the bottom, just to help with that. But it's really, really, really a very nice rendition of the character. A character like Carnage now, you want to convey this sort of power and out of control madness, and all of that, all of that is very nicely communicated with this figure. So I'm quite happy with the way it turned out. So yeah, overall, I have to say that all three of these figures over here elicit, at least visually, a resounding ish. So you're still not convinced? Okay, well, let me bottom line it for you, right? coming back to the Spider-Man, and you see well, the Spider-Man line as a whole. Yeah, okay, let's start there. The Spider-Man line as a whole, I have to say these are such popular characters. These characters are a part of all of our respective childhoods. From that 90s cartoon and all the way up to date. So now what you have over here is three brilliantly designed statues. As is the case with Kotobukiya, very well designed. They, of a very high quality, generally speaking. And what's really, really nice is that they are counterbalanced by a reasonable price point. Now, I think you'll agree with me that when you look at most other lines, and in particular, you know, the renditions of these characters in those respective lines, you find that they are almost always unaffordable. Now over here, what you have is or what you have are rather some really well designed figures, with some beautiful sculpted detail, phenomenal paintwork, all of which come in a very, very decent price range. So when you add those things together, I mean, I have to say that these three figures, together with the others in the line, as you see here in the overall picture, all elicit a resounding ish. And I would strongly suggest that you go out and get them. If you haven't already completed your set, well, fortunately for you, these figures are all still available in stock. Though, to be fair, I have to say that some figures of the year are probably going to be more popular than the others, and I foresee them getting sold out fairly soon. So, yeah, rush out and get them. Personally, my personal favorite in the entire line would have to be, the initial Spider-Man, the Peter Parker Spider-Man, and the Venom, the Venom themselves. That those two figures are my favorite. Coming in close after, there will probably be the 2099 Spider-Man with the Agent Venom figure. Following that, there will be the Carnage, and then last, I guess just because I didn't really get into those characters, Spider-Gwen and Ultimate Spider-Man. But overall, very, very happy with how the line turned out. I must say it's a much better offering than Kotobukiya's last line, that was the Marvel Now X-Men, where I did feel that they lost the plot slightly. One of the criticisms of the last line was that the new looks didn't really capture audiences. Now, with this line, in contrast, there's a nice balancing between the classic looks of the characters against the modern Marvel Now version of the characters. So pretty much all collectors, young and old, from back then and contemporary, are all covered. So that was a good choice by Kotobukiya overall. Anyway, I thank you guys for watching. We've now reached the end of the video in this video series, so these figures. So if you'd like to see more content like this, be sure to like, share, subscribe, do all of that stuff, and I will catch you guys soon. Ciao!